Hi, I'm Josephine Lacey, stand-up comedian.
I know you stand up and relevant theme of the podcast focuses on neurodivergent years. Your comedy will links to your experience as an autistic mother. So can you give an insight about your career in comedy so far and how you started?
My comedy career started more as a hobby. 9, my son got his diagnosis, he was 2.5. The year before that, I had turned 40 and I just wanted to do something that I hadn't done before. And I'd done a comedy writing course, 7 weeks. And when I say 7 weeks, it was one day a week, 3 hours on that day. And at the end of it, we did a showcase to friends and family. It was with the comedy school. The director is Keith Palmer. It's a great organisation. They do brilliant work. And I thoroughly enjoyed my showcase, and I just did comedy as a hobby at the time. I was in a fairly high profile job. I was managing the services in a London borough for vulnerable adults in trench rough sleepers. And when my son got his diagnosis, I just felt I was doing a lot on both work front and home front. And I took some time off and it was in Edinburgh 2010. I was invited up for a week. I was still a newbie. I was still doing open mic nights, and a few of us came up here, and I just ran around doing spots all day, and I thoroughly loved it. And I knew I was looking for another career. Because of my dyslexia, I'm not really comfortable in educational settings like colleges and universities. So I thought I'd try to do something where I didn't have to go back to college or go to university. And because I was doing the open mic and because I thoroughly enjoyed my experience at Edinburgh Fringe, I thought I'm going to make a stab at making comedy my career. And I haven't really looked back since.
Yeah. And I know when I was looking up to research the notes of what things I could ask within this interview that early on to the comedy. So, me and my little Einstein, I think
Yeah.
that was referenced. And so I know you've been talking about your experience as a mother of an autistic child for a while, but has there always been the case that when you started, you like start out by exploring other topics and themes?
I've always been, my natural comedy voice has always been somewhat of a storyteller, and I've always touched on real life experiences. So I wouldn't say I was a gagster or a one-liner, or even a topical comedian. I draw on my own personal experiences and my heritage being Jamaican Irish. I think my first couple of open mic sets were actually about my middle child and my middle son. And then it just, as I got confidence in what I wanted to share and I found my comedy voice, then I touched more on more personal stuff. And then I came about and I started to write stuff. At the time, my son was non-verbal, and I was writing stuff and sharing experiences of that. Hence how me and my little Einstein came about. It didn't go really much further because soon after I had it polished and was doing it, I think I'd done 3 live performances and I became very ill, which is a different topic. But I became ill and I took a bit of time out.
So has always been something you felt comfortable in, or did you have to build on that confidence to be so open and touch upon personal stories, personal in terms of your family life? Because for some people that can be quite a difficult thing to open up on stage.
No, I think that was always kind of like my comedy voice. I just felt it easier to share what I knew. I don't know if it was even somewhat therapeutic, but I found that was my comedy voice, and that was I just wanted to draw on what I knew, what my experiences were.
From when you was doing Me and My Little Einstein, what was the comedy so looking at, and what was the main story from that?
It was mainly how we communicated. It was about things like, it was about his fecal smearing. It was just about his little quirks when he developed echolalia. It was just about our relationship, really, and what I was experiencing as a mother who had only really heard the word autism. None of my friends had autistic children at the time, or it was just something new to me. So it was a new experience. And my son, my autistic son, is a lot younger than my other two children. So when I had him later in life, I had him when I was 38. I just thought, look, I've got this down. I've been a parent for 18 years. But of course, he was extra special, and I had to learn a whole new way of mothering. So that came out in it as well.
And echolalia, I think for some autistic parents or some autistic people, even for people who've been diagnosed for a few years now, might be only heard about that phrase very recently, because it seems to be started to use more now, and it's something that I think a lot of people might have not heard about time off when you were doing that Me and My Little Einstein song. When I looked about, that was like a decade or so ago. How do you learn about the terms of being autistic, and what has been your path to understand and learn for parenting your son? What's been the ways that you've learned about autism?
He luckily was diagnosed quite young, maybe because I'd been a parent to two others. I knew soon on my son was different, for want of a better word. He looked physically perfect, but I just sensed there was something different, and each developmental stage, he didn't hit markers. So he was diagnosed at 2.5. I got a lot of input from the services at that time. And I think a lot of parents think that it's down to the nurseries or schools to apply for EH, but it's not. Parents can do it. And I actually applied for his additional support before he reached nursery. So when he started nursery, he had a one-to-one from day one. And then I was just referred on to different kind of support groups, speech and language, music therapy. I'm in no way an expert in autism, but I'm an expert in my son. So I've just been led by my son.
Yeah, and I think it's like most parents, I think, autistic or not autistic, would be from the years you do learn a lot of things. And as I said, no, you're not an expert, but you can really get to understand your child and really learn about them, because, as they say, every autistic person is different, and it's about as they can really get and to understand how their autism affects them. And I guess something from maybe your previous job when you were working with vulnerable people as well in the area of London, I think, as you were saying, I guess that's giving you information about how to understand some of the services maybe around applying for certain support.
Yeah, there was a lot of things to hand. And it, like you said, autism affects everyone differently. So I suppose we were handed all the same tools, the same parents that were in the support groups, but you use them, like Callum was very reactive to deep pressure exercises, and you just use the tools, what they respond to, and get out of the services what you can. And I was quite good in voicing my son's need and not giving up. If I came across a brick wall, I would find a way of tearing that wall down for him. Because sometimes you can feel like you're beating your head against the brick wall when you're dealing with services. And I get that they have limited resources and they have limited funding, but there's the only people who suffer when the needs are not met is the child or the person with autism.
That awful lot where you can see some of the problems there with like how autistic people in terms of like oh the system's not always easy for autistic people and parents of autistic children to teachers or whatever in that sport. So what things would you have liked to get, what problems you saw over the years of being a parent? What things have you seen that could be done to change things for the better?
You mean in general or
Yeah, yeah, from just whatever you think from this.
in general, everything, unfortunately, things boil down to money. The government needs to throw a lot more money into services for not just autism, but disability services in general. Unfortunately, that's what it comes to. And also informative. I don't think that, unfortunately, even now, autistic children or autistic people, adults, it's looked at they should find a way in fitting into the world, whereas the world should fit around them. It's got slightly more awareness now than when my son was diagnosed, but it's still not nearly enough and nearly not good enough.
I can see that something that the problems that you see of the lack of awareness and education that has tied into comedy career because as you say you're storyteller, not laugh after laugh, jokes and gags and liners. And I guess that is that element of even though people come for a good time and laugh, you can able to provide something that is quite informative and educational for people. So I guess within your comedy shows, you kind of end up working some things that could be quite relatable from your experience to educate people who might not know the things about being an autistic parent. If you catch my drift.
Yeah, that's been a lot of the feedback, especially with the current show that I'm doing. I've been getting feedback from the autistic community and the from parents who don't have a relationship with autism. And that's great. Even I think some of the reviews have highlighted, as well as being funny, it's educational. And I have actually performed the show to teachers and governors, and I will be tweaking the show to bring into school for students, which will probably be more of the side of supportive and informative, opposed to club funny or show funny. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's quite an important thing too, because I think that in school, at least now from my own personal experience of going to school and as I went to a mainstream school, there was that, I think there was that thing that I definitely found was quite difficult because you didn't have those conversations on what it's like to be autistic or just having some sort of education on it. And I guess that your interest was at least with doing all shows or just bringing in you going into school and visiting them and giving some talks. That gives some information about a personal level of what it is like to be autistic, not from a first-hand experience of an autistic person, but somebody who knows the experience from a parent of an autistic person who was really researched and made has been quite researched and found in right information and words to say about it in respect to autistic experience, if you sort of get what I mean.
Yeah, I'm not an expert in autism,
Yeah.
and even with having the experience with my son, I still sometimes I don't get things right straight away. When my son does an action or something for the first time, it's my first time experience. And sometimes I don't get it right the first time. When he was completely non-verbal, I had to work out his gestures on, was he hungry? Was he thirsty? what was it that his need was when he walked into the kitchen and just stood in front of a cupboard, and I sometimes got that wrong, and that led to awful meltdowns, which were heartbreaking, and how to reduce that pain in him and how to regulate him. I had to learn the tools by trial and error a lot of the time on how to help my son regulate himself. But yeah, you persevere because it's your child. For every parent, it's going to be different, although triggers can be similar. And when I do the show, parents, especially of those who are raising children with autism, they can recognize a lot that I'm saying. They will maybe use different tools in what they're doing with their children, be it or their adult child, their adult son or daughter.
Yeah, I understand that. I think that's a thing that parents are not never going to get everything right. And
Sometimes we're going to get things
yeah,
wrong. That doesn't make us bad parents, that we don't give up and we try again. And yeah, of course, listen, I've gone into my room, I've sobbed uncontrollably into my pillow, I've I've beat myself up. My son was diagnosed when he was 2.5. Now, up until then, he had challenges and I could see he was different. I knew he wasn't talking. I knew he wasn't giving me eye contact. He wouldn't eat his food off of a plate. He would tip his food from a plate onto the table. And if I tried to put it back onto the plate, he'd have a massive tantrum. At that time, there wasn't a name put to, but we managed. We got on with things. And when he was 2, I presented him to the doctor and I said, look, he doesn't talk, he doesn't do this. And he said, write everything down. I'll send him send a referral to Child Services and we'll get him assessed. And we waited 6 months. But the minute they put the name to what was wrong, not wrong, but the minute he got his diagnosis, I remember leaving the assessment centre, going home and trying to stop tears from falling. And when I got home, I cried. One, mainly because I didn't understand autism, but I remember thinking all of a sudden that I was not going to be adequate as his mum. I wasn't going to be good enough, even though for the last 2 years I'd met his needs without knowing what his diagnosis was. But because a name had been put to it, probably fear, I all of a sudden thought, what if I'm not good enough? What if I can't meet his needs? What if this and what if that? That's probably a natural thing. But I had just forgotten for the last 2 years I'd met all his needs.
yeah. For autistic people, sometimes there can be like a negative representation of when parents of autistic children have a moment of feeling quite emotional and feeling quite sad when that diagnosis is and saying times is. And like it's in your cases, it's not any sort of grief or loss of any like childhood they could have had if they weren't autistic. But from your point, I think is quite something really empathetic and sympathetic with how you felt as a parent of finding it difficult that you weren't going to ever be good enough. And I think that can sometimes be quite a thing for parents. I can totally understand that because for parents it can be such a challenging job, and it's not something that I am a parent myself, of course, but I do definitely understand how it can be quite difficult thing to navigate, especially as you say, if you're unable to know how your son was going to eat and all that. It can be quite a worrying thing, and you really just wanted to help him out, and you really want to learn everything as much as you can just to make sure everything's good for him. And I think that's what needs to be recognised as very good parenting.
I think there's a saying, and this is just about parenting full stop. There's a saying that it's easy not to be a parent. It's extremely difficult to be a parent, in the sense of you can not really care. You can have children and not really care. Your children can run around feral. You don't know where they are. You can put your needs before your child's needs. That can be quite easy to do. Once you have children, it's quite hard to maintain and to live and to make sure that you're giving your child a better life than what you had. There is an added amount of pressure, challenges when you are a parent carer, whether that's your child is autistic, whether your child has a physical disability, whatever that is. The minute you're a parent carer, that is different, because that's not something you've asked for. Some parents will know they will have those challenges from pregnancy, from a scan. They will get the idea that their child is going to be born different or have other challenges. They will normally be physical disabilities, but a lot of parents do not know that immediately. And then it comes along that actually the child, the beautiful child that you've had, is going to need this extra help. And that takes away a lot more of, once you're a carer, and be it who you're caring for. Now, open this up. I'm not going to leave anyone out. Even if you're a carer to your parent or something, once you are a carer, your life is not your own. Full stop. And that is very difficult. That can be very difficult to come to terms with and to live with on a daily basis, especially when you have other children who don't need that same extra input. And then they're displaying maybe jealousies, maybe upsets. Not every family member is going to be as understanding as, look, I know a number of parents who were coupled, they were married when their child was diagnosed, and they are no longer together, or they're divorced. And they will tell you, they have told me, the main pressure was because of having that child who needed that extra input, and maybe one partner not feeling that they were getting attention, maybe the strains of both working and trying to juggle who does what when. It's hard for families.
Yeah, and as we were saying here, sometimes for parents there is that lack of support because, well, especially if like you're a single parent, and as you say, you got like multiple kids. I think it's the element of having a lot of things on your plate, juggle, and I think it's about, I think always when you have your children, you always just have to make sure the love is there and you feel you can be there for your child. But as you say, that anyway, and then there also needs to be a lot more about that support network about parents of disabled children, because as I guess then it can be quite lot of weight on somebody's shoulders of having to deal with that. I guess your anxiety, depression, it can be off. I guess when you said sometimes you're worried about where not being enough for your child, I guess it's that it can be quite overwhelming, the worries of being just good enough as a parent.
I have always raised my son on my own from the day he was born. And I've not been previously lucky in love. So I'm also a single parent to my other children. They're not the same father. I sometimes think I'm lucky that I've been a lone parent, in the sense of I haven't had the pressure of trying to keep a relationship or a marriage going. So that's not been an issue for me. I've never had that kind of forum where I'm sharing my son or sharing the load. I've just always known the load is mine. In that respect, I've learned how I juggle that, how I juggle my day. And the way I juggle my day is that, first and foremost, my son's needs come first. I work around that. And that's why comedy was really useful to me, because it was like being able to work in an agency. I worked when I could. I worked when I had the babysitter was available. I was able to go out and work then. My big son, who's my middle child, he lives at home, and there's been parts of our lives where we've split our working week. He'll work at the beginning of the week where I don't go out to comedy, but then I'll work from the Thursday to the Saturday or the Sunday where I get paid. I get paid better and meet the household bills that way. So you find a way of doing that. But when I've seen how families are, I've always felt, although it's a lot more strain, but like I say, it's something that I've managed. And parent support groups that have been set up by parents of children with disabilities are brilliant. How we support one another within those is great. And I don't know what I would have done without some of the support groups that I'm in, some of the networks that I belong to. And again, unfortunately, these are normally voluntary things. They're voluntary groups. They're non-funded by the government, as well as everything else that parent is dealing with. They keep these groups going. So, like, blessings to those as well. They've been of a great help, and they're a great need also.
From that, as you said a lot about the difficulties and the challenges of being a parent of the child with high support needs, and feelings around that. How has it been like from that experience of finding the funny side, humour with it for that, of to make it like, how have you used that experience to work it into comedy?
I just use, they're my experiences, and I just look at them. You use humour in everything. You can take humour and look at it in any kind of context, in any kind of situation. It's just that I happen to believe that not only by finding the funnies in my real stories, I get to share something that is real and honest in a humorous way from my thought process. It's just, I'm an honest speaker and I'm naturally humorous. I naturally see things in a light-hearted way without it looking like or sounding like I'm taking the mickey out of a topic, or definitely not taking the mickey out of an individual. And I think because it's my story or our story, my family story, because it's mine, I own it, and I'm allowed to, and it's received as how I deliver that in a light-hearted way. And yeah, I'm not just taking autism. Like, I hear jokes and the punchline is like, oh, but it's all right, he's autistic. And I don't find it funny, especially if it's coming from someone who is not on the spectrum. If it's just a throwaway comment. So I think if it's your experience, you can run with it as you wish.
What has your family thought of your comedy shows, and what they have seen of you telling the story of your family?
My second child has seen a lot more of my comedy than my eldest, and him and his mates love it. And they love it because they know it's true. They've seen these things, and even his mates, they know that it's true. So when I'm talking about my son, they can visualize these situations. And because they know me, they know that's how I talk. For people who don't know me, the way I present the show is that they get a clear picture of the situation. They get a clear picture of my life. So I'm a 60s baby. So in the 70s, I grew up with comedians like Richard Pryor, Bill Hicks, Joan Rivers, just to name a few. But what they have in common is that they're real life storytellers. And even though those stories may be embellished, I used to get a feeling that those comedians left a piece of themselves. They shared a real piece of themselves with the audience, and they left a piece of themselves on that stage. And that's what I like to think that I do, that I give a piece of myself to my audience that they can picture, that they can understand, that they can see a piece of my life. And and even if they don't have a relationship with autism, they can picture that and they can leave with that. And that's how I like my comedy to be. That's my comedy voice.
How was your Edinburgh Finns so been going?
It's been great so far. Today is the 7th, so I think today will be my 8th show. I started on the 31st. The show thus far has gained 3 4-star reviews, and I've received a standing ovation. I'm in love with the show, so when I present it, although it's funny and educational and heartwarming, I present it with love. I'm just looking forward to continue to doing it every day during the Fringe and getting as many people to see it as possible.
We've been able to also meet other Virgin comedians, also get feedback from other neurodivergent autistic comedians that might have seen your show or seen of your comedy.
There's been autistic adults in my show. They don't all introduce themselves to me, but just yesterday I noticed that the way my audience is situated, there was a particular couple, and every time I looked that way, the individual would straight away, would not give eye contact, would not look at me. And I said to myself, okay, I'm guessing he's on the spectrum. It looked more than just shyness. Being up here, there's been a few introductory groups, and I went to the neurodiversity one, and that was for most of the people there were actually neurodiverse. I think I may have been the only one who was there who lived with neurodiversity and not be neurodiverse myself. And that was great. I got caught talking to a couple of acts there. I've received messages from acts, private messages, and saying they can't wait to see the show. I know it's been shared amongst them also. So yeah, there's a lot of buzz about the show, which I'm really happy for. Yeah, I'm really pleased.
Yeah, I can see it's been doing really well, as you said, got those 3 4-star reviews and all that kind of positive feedback. And it's been like the general gist of the comments or feedback.
Mainly how funny it is, how informative it is, how heartfelt it is, that it comes across that I'm a good mother. And they're mainly the gists of it. And also, if they're putting out a public post, if they've done something, it's you need to see this show, which has been great. Yesterday, 10 minutes before, about 10, 12 minutes before the end of show, I was performing, the fire alarm went off for the venue. And we all had to leave. We had to leave the venue. And I was just like, we can't just end here. I'm like, shall I finish the show on the grassy knoll? And we went round to the assembly point and went round the corner, and I finished the show on the grass. And it was great. The audience loved it. They got to see the end of the show. And yeah, it was just like I worked with what I had in that moment.
Early on, you said you're dyslexic. How has your experience of being dyslexic been like in terms of writing and developing your ideas? And I know there's quite a lot of dyslexic people within comedy, and maybe does that add to the thinking?
I was actually diagnosed with my dyslexia when I was 50. I was quite old, and I was doing a course. Now I knew that I've always had the same challenge. I've never liked a classroom setting. I've always found it difficult to extract and retain information from, even though I'm a wordsmith, even though I can write, even though my diction is excellent. If you gave me, for example, a history book on the kings and queens of England and Scotland and said, read that, and then I'm gonna quiz you on the kings and queens and their dates. I won't retain any of that information. If I watched a documentary with that exact same information in it, and then you said, watch this documentary, I'm going to test you on the kings and queens afterwards, I will retain a lot more information. I'm a visual learner, like my son. And it was when I did a throwaway course in my 50s. I was just looking for something to do, and we had to do like essays or stuff after each module, and I was having great difficulty, and we were doing them in small groups, and you were responsible for a bit, and I just thought, so it wouldn't just be myself I'd be letting down, it would be the small group. And I didn't want to ask them for help because they had their own part to do. And a very good friend of mine who is dyslexic, and she teaches dyslexic adult pupils, and I said, look, can you come and help me with this, because I just like, it's just throwing my brain. And we went through it, and she gave me these tools, and she was watching and she was asking for it, and she said, you're dyslexic. And I was like, I am. She said, you can go for a formal diagnosis, she said, but you have a form of dyslexia. And when I look back, I can see how that is affecting me. And even with my comedy, I very rarely write sets down. I retain a lot of my sets in my head. And because I'm such a prominent MC, what I do is when I have a new idea or new material, I work it into my MCing. So I don't have to attend new material nights and things like that. But it's not going to affect me any different. I've learned, I know how I learn, and I know how I get on. And like I said, I was 50 when I got my diagnosis.
At the age of 50, some people are probably quite majority. There's nothing is you have had some quite a lot of time in your life to adjust to it and adjust the way your mind is thinking. I think already by there you might have worked out how to manage and adapt how your brain works and make sure that works in of how you do your work in terms of like your comedy that you also referenced, your Jamaican and Irish heritage and identity. How have you added that into your comedy throughout your career?
It just comes out naturally. I don't talk too much about being Jamaican Irish. I draw on it in some respects. It is included in some of my comedy, but I've never done a whole 10 or 20-minute set about it. And it comes out in the sense of, I think an audience likes to know, because I'm often mistaken for different nationalities. I'm often mistaken for somewhere else in Europe, or I've been mistaken for Moroccan, but often I'm mistaken for Spanish or Italian. And sometimes I'm stopped, especially in the streets of London, I'm stopped by people who are lost, especially if I'm in places like Victoria or Westminster, and they're lost and they speak to me in their mother tongue because they've just presumed that I look like them. And I'm like, really sorry, I can't help you. I can't help you. So just so people don't question it, I come out and say that I'm Jamaican Irish.
And what you got into ahead for the rest of the Edinburgh Fringe?
Like I said, I'm looking forward to completing the Fringe. And after the Fringe, I'll have a run at Soho Theatre in November. That's in London, Dean Street. I have a week's run there of the show. And then I will be looking to bring the show on tour. I'd like to bring it to other cities. I've got an idea of combining Me and My Little Einstein and Autism Mama into a book, just take some elements out of Me and My Little Einstein when he was non-verbal, include Also, his gifts. He's been deemed a savant for his musicality. He has absolute pitch. Some may know it's pitch perfect. He's a genius at maths in some areas of mathematics. So all of that, and basically from birth to leading, I'm about to let him go into manhood. Now he's going to be 18 this month, actually. So I have a full scale range of topics and things that he's worked his way through and markers in his life, like I said, from birth to now, adulthood. He's no longer my autistic little boy. He's a wonderful young man who's going into adulthood who happens to be autistic.
And as you communicated of what he thinks of, like how you've been doing the comedy shows that touch upon your storyline, but also his storyline in much respects. Has he been able to communicate to you about how he feels about you can make his story as well as your story, but you like your two stories? Has he been able to, as he's communicated?
No, although he's got
Yeah,
verbicality, his comprehension of language and his lack of emotional understand gets in the way a lot, and he's a very anxious individual. Anxiety rules a lot of his day, and he doesn't get humour. Like, his kind of humour is not like standard humour, and often funny just naturally is not a funny thing. He doesn't go to work. That's mummy's going to work. And I work in clubs and I work in places that he wouldn't like. He's not going to like how busy it is. He's not going
yeah.
to like how noisy it is. He has sensory processing disorder. He's not going to like those things. And if I make a joke about something and say he witnessed it, because some stuff is embellished, I can honestly, if I was to say a joke that was embellished, I can honestly believe that he would stand up and say, "No, it doesn't go like that." Like, he's not going to get
Mm.
that I've embellished the truth to plant a funny in there. So, yeah.
Great, amazing. He's perfect with music. So I was been like with the music lessons and
Oh, it's going great. He this year he passed his grade 6 piano theory and practical. He got a distinction and honours, credits rather. He got distinctions and credits, and we'll know this month how he did with his maths GCSE. He managed to sit his maths GCSE. He got special circumstances. He didn't have to do the paper all at once. There was 3 papers, and he sat one paper a week. But he is the first pupil in the few years to have sat a GCSE in his school. He goes to a school predominantly solely for children with autism. Yeah, that was, so we're just waiting for those results, and I'm sure he's passed them, but it will be great. But it's now just, he'll be where he is for the next year, and then it's just trying to find him something suitable to be schooled with because of his anxiety and his support needs.
yeah.
He's not going to just be able to go into a specialised unit within a college.
I know it's one thing that it can be quite difficult curve for, or I know from my experience, it was difficult going from childhood to adulthood. But as I said, with his level of additional needs and high support needs, it's like something I would imagine can be quite really something that you would be like wanting to really focus on how you really make that transition from childhood to adulthood and where you can get that support needs, as I say, within the next area of college education, as I said, as I said, for specialist college, even though, as I said, you wouldn't be able to that residential or whatever.
Yeah, it's just about, he's got great support team around trying to develop something bespoke for him. It would be great if he could access a music college. That would be great. But like I said, we've got a few months to try and get something in place for him.
Best luck with that, and hopefully that does great enough GCSEs, and I'm sure we will too anyway. And I can
Yeah,
tell and I can see how proud of you are of him.
I'm very proud of him. I am.
Lastly, is there anywhere else where you want to, for people who want to keep an up to date of how they can find out about your comedy, where any up and coming gigs, and any future announcements? Do you want to say where they may be able to find or follow you online?
Yeah, so for the rest of August, Autism Mama will be at the Pleasance Courtyard, bunker number 3 at 6 p.m. I won't be performing on the 12th or the 22nd. After that, I have a week's run in November at Soho Theatre, that's Dean Street in London. If we've got anyone going to Spain, around Spain, I will be in Spain the last week of September, going around doing some comedy work. My website is under reconstruction, and I know, great timing, right? While the Fringe is on. The minute predominantly you can find me on Instagram, and when the website is up and running, I will put it there. I've also got a Facebook page, Josephine Lacey Presents. My tag everywhere is Funny Autism Mama. That's my handle on Instagram, Facebook, and dare I say, I'm on that Twitter. And I just always make a quip about, with the Twitter, I'm not going to be making my views on any world happenings. It is solely about comedy. And I'm fairly new to the Twitter. And once my website is up and running, I will post it on those forums when the website is up.